of these stories, have you?
No, I have not. Welcome back to Data Center News Asia. You just missed James asking if I've actually read any of these news stories before he sent me the list. And I was familiar with at least two of them. So let's see how we get on, shall we?
Yeah, I've got 13 tabs open, so that's not a great percentage, but we shall crack on as we always do.
We are here to be your LLM in the world of weekly data center news wrap-ups. All right, let's start with the OpenAI stories because there were a couple of those, and I had read at least one of these earlier in the week. There's a couple of stories related to OpenAI's activities in Asia. So Tata has acquired land for OpenAI. This is in Vizag, which is next to the big Google and Adani developments, and Tata's new data center business is branded as HyperVault, so potentially their first customer here for that gigawatt campus.
Yeah, so the reports are slightly sketchy. It doesn't explicitly say that they're going to be used for OpenAI, but I think people have deduced that based on the various different articles that have been released since HyperVault was launched back kind of the tail end of last year. So to use my common phrase, I think this is a case of watch this space for the moment, but it does look like there is potentially progress being made.
Yeah, there is space to be watched. The other big OpenAI project in Asia, and I think the debate for a long time was, would they be going to India or Australia with Stargate? And of course, the answer seems to be both. So yeah, that's Tata one. And then the Australia one, which we had previously reported that NEXTDC were the primary developer for their. So this is the NEXTDC's lingo is S7, and this was OpenAI's Stargate, and they have abandoned plans for a recycled water cooling system. Yeah, Craig was talking about this week, but what's he looking at instead?
Yeah, so this is an interesting one. It seems maybe like a bit of a planning miss by the authorities. So it sounds like NEXTDC were proposing that they would use this cooling system using recycled or grey water, so not potable water. However, it looks like they were unable to secure planning permission to get a pipeline out to serve the data center, and instead will now use a closed loop system, which again doesn't actually impact water, or certainly not potable water, as obviously it's closed loop. It doesn't require water going into the site. However, it may increase PUE. That's the kind of the trade-off you make when you use a closed loop system like this. Yeah.
Interesting. They had not gone into. I didn't realize that was a planning regulation. I thought it was a design decision. All right, excellent. And then we had a couple more stories from Australia as well. Oh, this was a interesting one because we've talked about this quite a long time. I think people had forgotten that these assets were even up for sale with some of the big transactions going on. But Fujitsu, who had been looking for an owner of their sort of like little data centers dotted around some small IT buildings, have sold their Australian data centers to Next Capital.
Yeah, this is an interesting one. So Fujitsu they've been in the market for quite a while, but relatively small footprint in terms of their IT megaload, so their IT megawattage. I think according to this report, total about 25 megawatts of capacity, with only 7 of this leased. I didn't actually check the DC byte figures before this, but that kind of sounds in the right ballpark. 130 clients, so I think speaks to the fact that it's kind of a retail play. I do know, however, that there is significant potential to develop some of these sites. This article that I'm reading here mentions that it could expand up to a total of 100 megawatts, which is quite interesting. But it's reported that these went for about 40 million USD, which is under the report. It was not disclosed, but reports NEXTDC paid just under the portfolio's 140 million US dollar replacement value. I don't know what replacement value means, but interesting nevertheless.
Yeah, I think based on the capacity and the way the buildings are, that they must have done a calculation here on how much it would cost to these buildings. Some of them are quite old as well, so
yeah,
the cost to build them, which is interesting because normally these platforms are going for significantly more than the asset value. But I suppose to your earlier point on the amount of actually leased capacity, it seems that the valuation for data centers is towing closer and closer to the contracted amount rather than what's actually here today. So people are looking at the future revenue, and I guess Next Capital were arguing that this should be a bargain on that basis.
Yeah, interesting. They did, if you read down the bottom of this particular article, they actually acquired iSeek in 2018, which was subsequently resold in 2021. So they have experience flipping these assets. Another interesting kind of tidbit from the article is they actually own the Digital Realty North Ride site in Sydney, which is, I think we reported this on this a couple of months ago, which is the one being essentially rebuilt and knocked down and built. So be interesting. Some of these sites may be sitting on nice fiber connections and stuff like that. So there may be actually the physical site may be more attractive than the actual data centers themselves. Because yeah, as you mentioned, some of these are pretty old sites.
Yeah, there we go. That was gone. So congrats to the Next Capital team. We'll see. Congrats on the first stage, getting the capital deployed. Let's see what they make of it. There's a big one proposed in Melbourne with, I don't have information here on the developer. This is in the city of Casey, and they're supposedly investing 1.1 billion Aussie or 770 million US dollars, according to the application that they filed. Thanks again to Australia's transparent regulations, making news stories for us. Yeah, so that's what they've listed on there.
Yeah, again, this is interesting for a couple of reasons, because this is in the urban growth zone, which sounds like this is an area that the Victorian government is trying to fuel growth in. However, then there's also mention at this stage that councillors have not been asked to make decisions on the applications, and he basically said no comment to whether this was actually going to happen or not. The actual site is still on the Galileo Group's website, and I don't believe there's been any additional movement on the site since then.
Really testing my noise cancelling here because the dog has just found out that the neighbours have a dog. I mean, he knows this, but it's new information to him and he's going crazy. Yeah, a lot of this seems to be coming out from different. I think that I credit to the journalist at DCD, Dan Swinho, who's cobbled together this report from various different applications and other people's news articles to get this story. But yeah, so big site coming up, and hopefully we'll be able to talk about who the developer is when that information is public as well.
Yeah, so I've just checked in our system. I do know who it is, but I cannot say at this moment in time.
Not for free.
Not for free, yes. If you pay us a generous fee, then of course we can unlock all the treasures of this site. There's another big Australia one. This is a gigawatt campus outside Darwin. I'm not sure if this is the same as the one we talked about a couple of weeks ago, or is this a net new one? Do you know?
I did do one the week when you were away.
Beetaloo Digital. Yeah, it's the Beetaloo Digital one. I cannot actually remember if this is is this the same one as the one we put on a month or so ago?
This is the same one, but I don't think I named Beetaloo Digital Hub at the time. That's new news. So who are Beetaloo Digital Hub of Beetaloo Basin?
They are Beetaloo Energy's spin-off digital platform by the looks of things. They want to develop a gas-powered data center in the Northern Territories.
Interesting. So this is another example of a utility or the power owner bringing a powered site to market. Presumably the easiest route to making a nice return for them would be to bring a DC operator or developer onto the land and cut them in if they've got power to offer at a good rate. And we know Darwin's got some good connectivity to Asia, at least, of the Australian locations. New Zealand, there's another one here. This is a bit of an update for DataGrid. So DataGrid is the site that was being built by Remy Glasso. So these guys, this is potentially 280 megawatts they were talking about, which was, and still is, a monstrous site for New Zealand. And the new update here is that Mercury, just Mercury. I thought it was Mercury Capital or Mercury Funds, but Mercury has taken a minority stake and put some more capital into the project.
Yeah, and that is not to be confused with Mercury, the planet. This is interesting because they actually signed a PPA agreement in March. So yeah, it's only quite recently, and now it sounds like they actually want a piece of the pie. So they've bought 12.7% stake for $30 million US. Yeah, an extra incentive for this project to work for both parties.
This is exciting stuff. Across both of these stories, we're looking at the energy players becoming more and more involved in the data center business. One of our upcoming guests on In Conversation is, of course, going to be Simone, who's the head of Vina Energy, and their new data center business, which comes off their power business. So he'll be talking more about that confluence as well. Should we go to Korea? There's a couple of stories in Korea.
There's one more New Zealand one while we're on it that they're actually calling, the Green Party is calling for a 1-year moratorium on AI data centers. So literally as soon as this was announced, the Green Party is calling for a moratorium. So there you go.
There you go. Not a fan of those gas deals, the Green Party of New Zealand, it appears. Meanwhile, in Korea, so NVIDIA and SK Group have announced a $500 billion AI agreement. Another one of these monstrous numbers coming out of Korea, and this will slot straight into the DC by early stage category. But yeah, so this is for a 2 gigawatts of data center capacity in an AI factory. SK, of course, one of the big Korean conglomerates who also have memory business and telco and all these sorts of things.
Yeah, this is watch this space. There's all the usual quotes from Jensen Huang and all these kind of people. In the interest of time, Reese, let's rattle through the last of these Korean stories. Where shall we start? LLS Electric LGU Plus. They've inked an MOU to develop DC-based power infrastructure for AI data centers. So I think this is tied probably to this NVIDIA announcement we just mentioned. Yeah, there's a lot of talk about the NVIDIA's building platform.
And there was a groundbreaking, I think. This is another Neo AI cloud is the business here. And this is being built by Hyundai Electric. And they've broken ground on a 300 megawatt facility in Pohang, which we will put up on the map.
Yeah, it's in the Gyeongsang province. It is not a major data center hub. So we are excused for not knowing it. SK Telecom launches dedicated data center unit. So SK, obviously, of SK, the conglomerate Reese was just mentioning about, they have announced seed investment of 750 billion Korean won, which is just over 500 million US dollars. And it will be a wholly owned subsidiary. What was interesting, which kind of caught my eye, was they aim to build out 15 gigawatts of capacity by 2035. So about 30 times, not quite 30 times, but not far off 30 times the current capacity of Korea, probably around 20 times. So bold ambitions. I think there's one other interesting Korea one. No, I think that's it.
Yeah, and I think we're not going to have time to get into there's a couple of Chinese stories this week about both chip supply and then a big property firm from Hong Kong building in Shanghai. But those will be featured in the newsletter, which you can get to your inbox if you are subscribed, along with 4,330 of our viewers. There we go.
Yes, and we'll also mention the IFC investing 175 million into air trunk data centers in Johor as well. Finance we typically leave to the end anyway.
There we go. Happy Wednesday, whatever it is.
Yeah, thanks everyone.